Answer continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Yesterday, before the Supreme Court, the Biden administration, through its Solicitor General, and an ACLU lawyer argued that the 14th Amendment means a state cannot ban transgender hormone regimes for, regimens, I should say, for adolescents. Yeah, that happened. That's where things are at, despite 26 states that have prohibitions on these trans procedures and regimens for adolescents, for minors. And we've gone from not knowing what a woman is at the Supreme Court, among certain justices, to not knowing what immutable is. Speaking of that justice who's just completely baffled by what a woman is, Ketanji Brown Jackson offered this comparison in her questioning of legal representatives for the state of Tennessee.
Being drawn by the statute. That was sort of like the starting point. The question was whether it was discriminatory because it applied to both races and it wasn't, necessarily invidious or whatever. But, as I read the statute here, the case here, the court starts off by saying that Virginia is now one of 16 states which prohibit and punish marriages on the basis of racial classifications. And when you look at the structure of that law, it looks in terms of, you can't do something that is inconsistent with your own characteristics. It's sort of the same thing. So it's interesting to me that we now have this different argument, and I wonder whether Virginia could have gotten away with what they did here by just making a classification argument the way that Tennessee is in this case.
Yes, I think that's exactly right, that there is absolutely a parallel between any law that says you can't act inconsistent with a protected characteristic and in all other contexts.
That's that's just sophistry. That's Elizabeth Preligor, the Solicitor General, agreeing with the statement provided in the form of a question by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
But I did get a litlittle hope when they asked Justice Sotomayor, is this a minority protection issue? And here was her answer.
When you're 1% of the population or less, very hard to see how the democratic process is going to protect you.
Well, Your Honor,
you blacks were a much larger part of the population, and it didn't protect them. It didn't protect women for whole centuries.
I'm sorry, what was encouraging to you about that?
No, I'm saying it was not encouraging. It was
Sotomayor is another occultist.
I know.
She's another identitarian cultist and a soft-headed legal mind, much like Ketanji Brown Jackson. This is just utter nonsense. It's not even close. The substance of this, the feds are arguing in the ACLU, is that a teenager whose sex assigned at birth is male can be prescribed testosterone to conform to male gender identity, but a teenager assigned female at birth cannot. And this is the discriminatory practice. As the Wall Street Journal opines, the problem with this argument is that it's sophistry. The Tennessee law is focused on diagnoses, and it permits treatments for a minor's congenital defect, precocious puberty, disease, or physical injury. A biological male can obtain male hormones to correct some medical problem. A biological female can't get male hormones for gender transition. This isn't sex discrimination unless the starting ideological premise is that the preference is the only difference between boys and girls. Right. And this is the discussion that Ketanji Brown Jackson, here we go again, had with Tennessee Solicitor General Matthew Rice, where I thought he provided a nice analog to try to help Ketanji Brown Jackson understand the difference.
That it operates on the body in the same way. So what's your basis for saying they're not the same?
I don't think it operates on the body in the same way. Take testosterone. If you give a boy with a deficiency testosterone because he has constitutional delayed puberty, that allows him to go through and develop the reproductive organs associated with being a male. If you give it to a girl, it renders the girl infertile. So we have 8 to 12-year-olds being
I'm sorry.
asked.
I thought your reasons for them being different was that you said they were for different purposes. I'd heard you say at the beginning the reason those two are different is because one wants them to transition and the other wants them for some medical purpose.
Well, to go back to my example in the introduction, I don't think anyone would say using morphine to assist suicide is the same treatment as using morphine to manage pain. It's the same drug, just like it's the same drug here, but they're being used for fundamentally different purposes. They have different effects on the body. And once you take out and you recognize medical reality, then there is no argument that our law differentiates between treatments for males and females.
I mean, the reason we're even here having to entertain this idiotic case is because of Gorsuch's majority opinion in Bostock, but I won't even go down that legal road anymore. Let's talk a little bit about the cult of trans. This is all identitary politics dressed up as equal justice under the law. That's what the Biden administration is trying to do with the help of the ACLU. Jennifer Bilek is an investigative journalist tracking the funding of the gender industry. She's the author of the 11th Hour blog, the 11thhourblog.com, and the book Transsexual, Transgender, Transhuman, Dispatches from the 11th Hour. Jennifer, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
So, I mean, I'm fairly confident. I mean, I just can't believe the speciousness of this argument that's being offered by the ACLU and the Biden administration is going to hold up with this court. But nonetheless, I mean, there is some real danger here of essentially codifying the trans cultists' predilections and unraveling the law in 26 states if, if, for example, Gorsuch doesn't recognize the error of his ways in Bostock.
Oh, it's really, I mean, we really are in danger. And when you say cult, I mean, it really is a cult. It's actually a marketing apparatus that is so dense and so infiltrated into our culture at this point that it operates very much like cult ideology. And what we're looking at here actually is a system that is acclimating us to the idea we are not a sexually dimorphic species. It's not just some woke ideology run amok. It actually has intention. And that intention is to make room for advanced reproductive technologies, anything from IVF to what they're researching now is womb implants for men who want to pose as women, ectogenesis, which is growing embryos outside of the womb, surrogacy, where the woman is who actually gestates the child, and this child grows inside of her, off of her organs, is treated like an object, like an incubator, and then the child is removed from her. And all sorts of other advancements that are happening at a breakneck pace. And society has to be acclimated to the idea that we are parts, that we are commodities in this system. So it's really a colonization process of human reproduction.
You know, I think that the need to see this as a cult is important because I think people have, you know, some sort of general understanding of that. And it helps to answer the question of, you know, what is the rush? I mean, if is the position of most people, if somebody wants to do that when they're of age, that's one thing. But to do this to kids in their formative years, you know, why the rush? And they come up with the fact-free arguments about mental health and the incidence of suicide and so on and so forth. But I think the understanding what all cults do, you have to get to the kids, you have to indoctrinate them and bring them along. I think that helps to frame it so that you can appreciate what's happening here, what the dynamic is.
Absolutely. And I don't think this idea that, adults should be able to do whatever they want with their bodies. I mean, this is a deconstruction of human sex. You can't have people running around denying that with their physicality. It completely ruins statistics of any sort. It confuses children when they're forming their ability to name and recognize reality.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. The business side of this too. I mean, this gets increasingly ghoulish as you look at it from different angles. The organization Do No Harm has published, has put up a database to show just how much money is here in terms of looking at medical reimbursements for the prescription of puberty blockers, for trans surgeries on minors. They're doing it by state, by hospital, by doctor. And what we find, of course, Illinois being, as usual, the worst example. Illinois is number one in the country, the highest amount of reimbursements for gender transition services for adults and kids in Illinois at north of $40 million. So the aspect of this where the medical establishment has folded in, at least some of the medical establishment, because there's money to be made.
Well, there's boatloads of money to be made on people that, are lifelong medical patients once they start down this trail. And, the prolific marketing apparatus that drives people to do this, and also framing it as a human right when it's actually a business, it all drives these surgeries, which are very, very profitable. But the real big kahuna is grooming us for the deconstruction of sex, because now we're parts, and these parts, we're much more profitable as parts, as sperm, as eggs, as wombs, as, hormones, et cetera, as opposed to, we are whole beings. Our sex is part of us. It's integral. We're put together, but this system, this ideology, and this, gender identity stuff is really just meant to obscure the industry that's happening right before our eyes. So the real big kahuna is the tech reproduction market that is, it's growing to the point where, you can have a woman who gestates a baby inside of her and another woman's eggs that are implanted in her, and then a man's sperm. So now you have three biological parents, not genetically all related, but definitely all biological parents of this child. We've never seen anything like that before. And these technologies are growing exponentially, so they have to acclimate us. And the way to do that is to, give us the idea, permeate the atmosphere with the idea that we're not actually a sexually dimorphic species. And the Pritzkers of Illinois are a big, big driver of this ideology. They're funding medical centers, gender clinics, universities, the military, et cetera, millions and millions and millions of dollars to saturate the culture here in America and also in Canada with this ideology that we're not a sexually dimorphic species, that they are reducing us to commodities. And the root of this is in the compulsion, a sexual compulsion of adult men that we used to understand as transsexualism, but it's been rebranded for the youth, to capture the youth, to transgenderism. You can't really sell a fetish of adult men to children or their parents, but rebrand it to transgenderism, make it very cool and progressive, and you have a whole branding and a whole new market.
And then cast them as sort of a victim class that needs to be protected because they're being discriminated against. And then you have the moral high ground, you think.
Yes, huge.
So, but the Pritzkers, how much money are we talking, and how big is this business going to be in, say, 2030, if it's not stopped by the Supreme Court?
Well, it's already in the billions. It's going to be, by 2030, we're probably talking, I don't know, it's 30 billion maybe.
I mean, what is
There are varying, a lot of varying statistics. about, where the market is going, but it is growing, broadly, because the marketing for it, under the guise of a human rights movement is so dense, it's so prolific, it's everywhere. And they're sending millions and millions of dollars to institutions, educational institutions, to drive the ideology.
What's your perspective on the Pritzker family? I mean, so obviously they're not making money on this. They're using their money to drive a particular cultural and societal outcome. So what's the
they'll be making lots of money. Their investments are now, they made their money in the high-end hotel industry.
Yeah, yes.
But
so
now it's all in the medical industrial complex, all their investments.
Right, but I mean, but there's and I knew Jennifer Pritzker when he was Jim Pritzker. There's a underlying ideology that's really driving this, though. There's a socio-political paradigm shift that they want, and I wanted your perspective on what you think that is.
Well, I think that I already tried to clarify that. I think that this ideology is being driven specifically to change our perceptions of ourselves as a species, as a sexually dimorphic species, because we are being broken into parts for the technological reproductive market. We are no longer whole biological sex systems, but we are penises, breasts, vaginas, hormones, chromosomes, etc.
And this is right. And this is an advance to what end? Is this an advance to transhumanism? Is it an advance to?
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that you can have 3 biological parents is already a transhumanist paradigm. Yeah, and Martine Rothblatt is another character. I mean, I've written profusely about the Pritzkers, and I use them as being emblematic of other funders and other billionaires that are driving this ideology. And another one is Martine Rothblatt, who actually wrote down this cult ideology. He created it with other transvestites. And he wrote a book of this ideology called From Transgender to Transhuman. And so all of the things that are going down in the culture right now are in that little tiny little book.
And
he's also been, I'm sorry?
No, and this is, I mean, and this, so that, and the transhumanist perspective is in service to the goal of immortality, the destruction of the nuclear family, to recreate society to organize society in some other basis besides the nuclear family, some combination of the two.
Yes. Well, if you're going to destroy, sex, if you're going to deconstruct sex for the market, you have to destroy the family. You have to, and that's part of what's happening here. And I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, that's all right. I mean, I think people are just trying to get their mind wrapped around why is there so much billionaire money backing this, and why is there such a push? And you're always trying to understand somebody's motivations or the premises from which they're starting in terms of the outcomes they want, that they desire. And I think people think,
well, this is a more it's intricately connected to fusing humanity with AI, artificial intelligence, and technologies, which we've been moving towards, for generations now. And it just gets more and more profound, how attached we are to technology and how removed we are from the natural world. So this is an extension of that. Now, there are some transhumanist ideas that are not horrible. Like, for instance, they now have implanted AI in artificial limbs so that people without limbs can they're in a much, much better position because the AI actually learns from their movement and then so can govern the artificial limb itself. So that's pretty profound. That's a transhumanist ideology. But this ideology is completely deranged because it's driving immortality. That you're going to be living in the singularity, like Ray Kurzweil of Google talks about.
Yeah.
Google was the first company with a transhumanist platform. And he believes that we're all going to be living in cyberspace, as data. And he's been writing about this since, late 90s, early 2000s, when gender bills were first authored by this person, Martin Rothblatt, who's co-founder of Sirius XM satellite radio. He runs around with simulacrums of women's biology, telling people that he's a woman. He's a tech entrepreneur, a very, very successful tech entrepreneur. He's owned a pharmaceutical corporation. He has worked on the human genome at the UN level, oddly enough, creating an ethical structure for that. So we're seeing vast changes, in humanity, technological changes in humanity at different fronts. But the transgender, what they call transgender, or the gender industry, is really the reproductive front of that ideology.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the Trump administration.
Again, the marketing is so dense and so profuse, and it's embedded now in all of our institutions and market. And it's marketed as progressive. We never have seen, any kind of body dysmorphic disorder marketed as a positive, progressive, another way to be human. Right? So this, the idea that this is a medical condition is just absolute bunk.
Hopefully the Trump administration can make science fiction again. Jennifer Bilek is an investigative journalist tracking the funding of the gender industry, author of the 11th Hour blog, the11thhourblog.com, and the book Transsexual, Transgender, Transhuman, Dispatches from the 11th Hour. Jennifer, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dan. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
We'll talk border policy. What exactly will Trump's mass deportation program look like? Darlene McCormick-Sanchez from the Epoch Times joins us, 8:38.
But now into the newsroom we go. Here's Mike Scott.
12 degrees, partly cloudy skies at 8:32.